The majority of Americans across the country,
Wrong.
regardless of political party, know that immigrants from all over the world, Somalia, India, wherever they're from, Latin America, Africa, that immigrants have built this country.
This is not incompetence. You don't let $1 billion plus go through the state government that you're in charge of, get dispersed out to criminals and shipped back to terrorists overseas without having somebody being complicit in this act.
A scandal of alleged widespread fraud throughout the state of Minnesota has politicians and residents of the state on edge. This comes after prosecutors have charged dozens of people with stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from state-run programs.
The fraud is so bad that the U.S. Attorney's Office has come out and indicated that they believe their entire government programs, where the fraudulent claims outstrip the legitimate ones.
A big reversal in a $7.2 million fraud case in Hennepin County.
Yusuf and his wife, Lowell Ahmed, were charged with stealing $7.2 million of taxpayer money through Medicaid. The couple allegedly spent tens of thousands of the fraud money on luxury items for themselves. Despite the jury swiftly convicting Yusuf, Judge Sarah West last week decided they got it wrong.
Hundreds of social service workers publicly are blaming him for a massive fraud scandal that's been rocking the welfare system in the state. Staff at Minnesota Human Services Department say widespread false billing allegedly funneled more than $1 billion in taxpayer funds to nonprofits that are tied to the Somali community.
If you haven't seen Nick Shirley's nuke that he just set off, the link will be in the description. Go check it out and come back. You should, unless you're living under a rock, you should know a little bit about the Somali fraud situation in Minnesota. In this video, of many probably to come about this topic, I really want to go back 7 years ago to the local Minnesota news that are talking about whistleblowers and millions of dollars leaving in suitcases for the Middle East and Somalia. Ultimately, we're going to talk about how we went from one governor to the next. We went from non-pandemic time to the pandemic time, and how the subsidies exploded, and how someone that no one knew whatsoever at all, named Tim Walz, ascended himself to the top of the ticket for the Democrats into a VP slot. And I think it's all tied together. I feel like it's fairly simple. They were doing a little bit of fraud, still significant, about 7 to 10 years ago. The PLANdemic allowed it to balloon. The Democrats realized that they can buy the Somalian bloc vote by allowing them to commit the fraud, and the two groups, the Somalians, the people that are willing to commit fraud, and the Democrats were able to work hand in hand to always clean each other's money, always allow the fraud, and they will continue to vote, and their people will always win, and they'll always be able to clean each other's money constantly. Even whenever they do indict 90 people for a fraud like this, and they get convicted by a jury of their peers, the judges appointed by the Democrats are letting them off and overturning jury convictions. It's pretty weird. Then you have a regular guy show up and kind of expose on a day-to-day basis that these people aren't operating a legitimate business. And then CNN and all the arms of the Democrat Party come out in the mainstream media and attack Nick Shirley and go after Nick Shirley to try to cover up the fraud and kind of get your target away from the fraud and the people, the poor people of the Somalian community in Minnesota, and go after Nick Shirley, a MAGA right-wing activist, which he's none of those things. He's just a regular kid that's just doing YouTube videos. Why do you think so many people are fighting against finding out this fraud and revealing this stuff? Why would the Democrats allow for such levels of fraud to happen under their noses if they weren't getting kickbacks? You know, why do you think if whistleblowers are saying, hey, they're committing a bunch of fraud, I don't think this stuff is legitimate, and then someone higher up than them says, shh, be quiet, don't talk about that, just let that go. If they weren't having a benefit to it, if it wasn't just for they're either buying votes or they're getting money directly back through ActBlue, no matter what. It's one or the other. Either way, it's highly illegal and it's treasonous. It's disgusting. So let's get into it. If you've never seen one of my videos before, man, I just cover whatever's going on. It's no big deal. I'm just a regular American. So hit buttons. Let's do this shit. Let's get into it. Right before Tim Walz took office about 7 years ago, what was in the local news in Minnesota? Remind me again?
That's right. Tonight, you're going to hear from a government whistleblower who tried sounding the alarm about this massive fraud well over a year ago. He's speaking out because he believes he has a moral obligation to do so and because he feels lives are on the line. Emails obtained by the Fox 9 investigators show the Department of Human Services was warned that it had a massive daycare fraud problem on its hands, that millions of stolen tax dollars were going overseas, and it was likely some of the money was being skimmed by terrorism organizations.
I've never seen anything of this level or scope in my 27-year career as an investigator.
Scott Stillman spent 8 years managing the state's digital forensics lab. That means he mined data from computers and smartphones. When the state started going after daycare centers suspected of fraud, Stillman was directly involved in the investigations. He was so alarmed by what he was finding that in March of 2017, he fired off a series of emails to his supervisors at the Department of Human Services.
We are working on and currently overwhelmed with significant fraud cases involving organized crime, defrauding hundreds of millions of dollars annually in taxpayer monies.
Here, Stillman is reading from one of the emails he wrote, which the Fox 9 investigators obtained through a public records request. DHS took 2 months before it turned over the emails, and much of what it provided to us was redacted.
They were not easy to write, but I felt I had an obligation because I think that there is a strong possibility this money is being used against innocent civilians and against our military.
Stillman says he alerted a number of people in DHS, including the commissioner's chief of staff, with this message.
Significant amounts of these defrauded dollars are being sent overseas to countries and organizations connected to entities known to fund terrorism.
Was the warning ever passed along to Governor Dayton?
I was not informed.
He says no, but other sources tell us people within the governor's office were told about these concerns a couple of years ago.
My chief of staff currently and previous chief of staff, from what I'm told, did not get any information alleging that there was that kind of volume of theft.
The state currently has 10 daycare centers under investigation for fraudulent billing of child care services. Each of the suspect centers has received several $1 million in government subsidies. According to public records and government sources, most are owned by Somali immigrants. We asked the Department of Human Services about the emails Scott Stillman sent in 2017. Who in the chain of command was aware of them and when? It responded with a statement. The Deputy Commissioner, Communications and Legal Staff learned there may be emails on this subject when Fox 9 made its data request in March. The then Chief Compliance Officer was informed at the time the emails were originally sent.
I would like to have an independent federal investigation of the handling of DHS programs, specifically a daycare program and the Medicaid fraud program, by preferably Homeland Security or the Department of Justice.
Scott Stillman is no longer with the state. He resigned from his position this past March after 10 years on the job.
So this fraud has clearly been going on for at least 2 decades. If they were doing sting operations in 2015, they were surveilling and doing raids in 2015. It's clearly been going on for at least 2 decades now. You have cases of whistleblowers back in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, screaming. That last guy, he ended up stepping down from his position. This guy was begging for the federal government to come in, and he basically was saying the state officials cannot be trusted with overseeing this fraud. They're possibly implicated in it. We need the federal government and DHS to come in and handle all of this. So an outside person comes in to do the audit, because he's been blowing the whistle for years, to the point where he ended up stepping down and resigning and stopped blowing the whistle. That's how long he blew his whistle for. The whistle ran out of whistle juice, and now he can't blow that shit no more. And then he just steps down. The governorship changes hands from Mark Dayton to Tim Walz, and you're supposed to believe that Tim Walz is surprised by this, and he's been working on this the whole time, even though he inherited a program that was already completely destroyed by fraud, and the investigations were in full tilt at that point. Now, people talk about them supporting terrorism and supporting al-Shabaab, which they do, but ultimately this money supports Somalia. They've stolen more money in the last 5 to 10 years than the entire GDP of Somalia itself. It's really gross. The next segment is going to show you how not only were they raiding these daycare centers, but listen what was happening at the Minnesota airports around the time that they were investigating all this fraud. This is going to be a report from 2018. Pay attention.
We begin at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport, where mysterious suitcases filled with cash have become a fairly common carry-on. It's the morning of March 15th. We're chasing a tip about a man who's leaving the country. Our sources tell us he just took a carry-on bag through security that was packed with $1 million cash. You can do that as long as you fill out one of these government forms. We're told these cloak and dagger-like scenarios now happen almost weekly at MSP International. The money is usually headed to the Middle East, Dubai, and points beyond. Our sources say last year alone, more than $100 million cash left MSP in carry-on luggage.
What we were interested in is where it was going.
The national go-to expert on what's behind these mysterious money transfers is Glenn Kearns. He's a former Seattle police detective who spent 15 years on the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force until his retirement.
It's an outright crime. It's unbelievable.
Kearns tracked millions of dollars in cash that was leaving on flights from Seattle. It was coming from hawalas, businesses used to courier money to countries that have no official banking system. Some immigrant communities rely on hawalas to send funds to help impoverished relatives back home. Kearns discovered some of the money was being funneled to a hawala in a region of Somalia that's controlled by the Al-Shabaab terrorist group.
So I talked to a couple sources who had lived in that region, and I said, if money is going to this hawala, do you think it's going to Al-Shabaab? And he said, oh, definitely. That area is controlled by Al-Shabaab, and they control the hawala there.
He says when the money arrives, whether it was intended for legitimate purposes or not, Al-Shabaab or other groups demand a cut. As Kearns dug deeper, he found that some of the individuals who were sending out tens of thousands of dollars worth of remittance payments happened to be on government assistance in this country. How could they possibly come up with such big bucks to transfer back home?
We had sources that told us it's all about it's welfare fraud. It's all about the daycare.
To better understand the connection between daycare fraud and the surge in carry-on cash, you have to look at the history of this crime. 5 years ago, the Fox 9 investigators were first to report that daycare fraud was on the rise here in Minnesota. We exposed how some businesses were gaming the system to steal millions in government subsidies meant to help low-income families with their child care expenses.
This is a great way to make some money. I think it's kind of that informal word of mouth.
In order for the scheme to work, the daycare centers need to sign up low-income families that qualify for child care assistance funding. These surveillance videos are from a case prosecuted by Hennepin County. They show parents checking their kids into a center only to leave with them a few minutes later. Sometimes no children would show up. But either way, the center would bill the state for a full day of child care. This video from that same case shows a man handing out envelopes of what are believed to be kickback payments to parents who are in on the fraud.
Where was the money going?
I don't know exactly where it went, but it adds up when you begin to look at how many people are involved.
One recent federal case points to at least some of the money going overseas.
Of the United States.
This is video of Fozia Ali being sworn in as a member of the City of Hopkins Park Board. As she was taking her oath of office, she was also under investigation for wire fraud and theft of public money. State and federal agents had already raided Ali's daycare center in South Minneapolis. The business was suspected of billing the government for over $1 million worth of bogus child care services.
We found records that indicated that she was collecting a significant amount of money for a much larger number of children than were actually attending the center.
Did any of the money go overseas?
We are aware that some of the funds went overseas, which she was cashing out money from the business.
Do you have any idea what it was going for?
I can't say.
Can't say or don't know?
I can't say.
Investigators analyzed Ali's cell phone to track her activities. She'd taken a 2-month trip from Minnesota to Dubai and then Kenya, staying at times in $800 a night hotel rooms. She used an app on her phone to bill the state of Minnesota for child care services while she was out of the country. Ali pled guilty to the daycare fraud and this March started serving time in a federal prison.
Okay, before we move to the next segment, it's time for you to get really, really angry. Now, remind us, who was that person? What was her name again? Let's run that back one more time because that Salama daycare and Miss Ali seem pretty familiar. Do you remember? These people were in trouble in 2015, being reported in 2018, and you know what the government did to stop them? They allowed them to just transfer ownership to their children or to her husband and continue running a daycare under a different name. The daycare named the Quality Leering Center in Minnesota. Yeah, guys, it's the same exact place. It's still operating and still committing fraud today, even though she went to prison for it.
This is video of Fozia Ali being sworn in as a member of the City of Hopkins Park Board. As she was taking her oath of office, she was also under investigation for wire fraud and theft of public money. State and federal agents had already raided Ali's daycare center in South Minneapolis. The business was suspected of billing the government for over $1 million worth of bogus child care services.
And if you're not mad enough yet, if that doesn't piss you off enough, I'll give you some more circumstantial speculation. That restaurant that you see advertised in Nick Shirley's video, that is right next to the Quality Leering Center, is called Albie's Restaurant. Now, Albie's Restaurant serves Somalian food. Could you imagine? And it's next to the same building and it just happens to be owned by the same family, last name Ali. Isn't that wild? These people are most likely getting food stamps, going to the grocery store and spending taxpayer money to buy groceries that they then sell as Somalian food in their restaurant that's next to the building that they have their fake daycare where they claim to take care of 99 kids every day, but no local has ever seen a child there ever. The restaurant, get this, Quality Leering Center's hours of operation are 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Guess what the restaurant's hours of operation are? 3 p.m. to 10 p.m. So they're using your food stamps to sell in their restaurant while they're billing you to take care of 99 kids every day in the fake daycare while they're at work just cooking in the Somalian restaurant. How much you want to bet this family, this Ali family, also owns a transportation company that takes the children to and from the daycare, and they probably also have a healthcare system as well that gives you the healthcare programs that will give you the transportation and give you the dude. Are you mad yet? Are you mad? Now that brings you to current day. Current day is Tim Walz is in charge. Ilhan Omar are in charge of Minnesota at this point. This fraud's been going on since at least 2010, and they know it. The pandemic is what exploded. By this point in 2017, 2018, 2019, everyone knows that you can't gain political power in Minnesota, especially Minneapolis and the main deep blue centers of Minnesota without having the Somalis in your pocket. So how did Tim Walz become the governor of Minnesota and then ascend to the vice president candidacy? Let's see if the Somalis had anything to do with it and it have anything to do with fraud.
laakiin waxyaabihii aan u ololeynay oo u taageernay gudoomiyaha waxa kamid ahaa gobolka Minnesota 30 sano ku dhawaad baan deganahay hal qof oo Afrikaan ah oo gudoomiye gobolku xil sare u magacaabay ma jirin suuqaasana inuu joognay waan gartay laba marna oo in la magacaabo kaliye waxa rabnaa waxtarka gobolka maadaama oo wax soo gelitaankiisa aanu qayb ka nahay nacfigiisuna waa inuu gobolka dadka Soomaaliyeed soo gaaro waxaa jirta in jirin hay'adaha Soomaaliyeed ama bulshada Soomaaliyeed wasaaradaha gobolka mid kamid ah oo xataa $100,000 taariikhda ka soo gashay gudoomiyaha Tim Walz ka hor si wanaagsan inaysan jirin laakiin markii ugu horeysay waxa suurta gashay in si toos ah loo taageero baahida dadka Soomaaliyeed oo
So the Somali community got behind Tim Walz, and at the same time, Tim Walz took control of Minnesota in January of 2019. That is the same exact time that Ilhan Omar also took control of her seat for Minnesota in Congress. So the Somali community put Ilhan Omar and Tim Walz in charge of Minnesota at the same exact time in 2019 after 9 years of known fraud going on for these Somali communities in these daycare centers, these transportation centers, these healthcare centers. And what results directly after they take charge? What happens a couple years later? after the pandemic unlocks it all?
Billions of dollars of government welfare money is missing in the state of Minnesota.
How do we define missing?
Well, the fraud is so bad that the U.S. Attorney's Office has come out and indicated that they believe their entire government programs, where the fraudulent claims outstrip the legitimate ones. There are cases where indictments have come down or guilty pleas are already in to the tunes of hundreds of millions of dollars that were fraudulently obtained, filing false claims alongside doctored paperwork. And the indictments are continuing to come. And the U.S. Attorney's Office has made very clear that this is a network of fraud schemes stacked upon fraud schemes, and that while the true dollar figure in terms of stolen funds at this point isn't quite clear, it's safe to say that we're talking about billions of dollars.
Okay. It's pretty wild, some of the things that you lay out, including one group called Feeding the Future that went from getting $3.4 million in 2019 to $200 million 2 years later. They grew faster than NVIDIA. How did nobody see that? Or is it that people and the government and those who are supposed to be the watchdogs, like Tim Walz, like Keith Ellison, the Attorney General there, just weren't looking?
I think it's safe to say that there was a real unwillingness or inability among Democratic state officials in Minnesota to recognize some pretty obvious alarm bells here. All across these programs, claims were skyrocketing, absolutely spiraling out of control over a short period of time. And the reality is that the Somali community, which is where these large-scale fraud rings have been concentrated within this population in the state, it is a sizable voting bloc. It is a voting bloc you have to win if you're going to win political office in Minneapolis. And so I think that was likely a incentive here that made some people not want to look too closely at what's been going on.
Now, if you're not mad enough yet, the last two things I'm going to show you are the two politicians that are basically in charge of this and are really got their fingers in the pie of the Somali community, okay? Ilhan Omar, they're going to ask her why she thinks all this fraud happened, other than white supremacy and racism causing it all to happen to this poor Somali community. Ilhan Omar, how did this happen under your watch? How did this happen?
Can you shed any light on why the fraud got so out of control in Minnesota?
I think what happened is that, when you have these kind of new programs that are designed to help people, you're oftentimes relying on third parties to be able to facilitate. And I just think that a lot of the COVID programs that were set up, they were set up so quickly that a lot of the guardrails did not get created.
So other than the white supremacy and the racism that made these poor Somali people lie and overbill and pretend that they have daycares, that they're operating every day at maximum capacity and they're not, it really was just, guys, these programs were so needed that and they just didn't have the right oversight. It's like the guardrails didn't get set up. What if I told you that Ilhan Omar is the congressperson that introduced the Mills Act of 2020, which did what? It allowed people to apply for waivers and that basically removed the guardrails and the oversight from creating these new facilities and these new resources. Guys, she's the one that created the system to not have oversight, to let them do whatever they want. And then when she's asked after the fact what happened, her answer is, well, there wasn't enough oversight. She fucking made it not have oversight, bro. I'm losing my mind. Okay, okay, stop. Breathe. What was Tim Walz doing this whole time? He took over this state knowing that it's wrought with fraud everywhere. What was he doing? What was he busy doing? He was busy introducing new rules back in 2023 that allows these daycare workers and allows these human health service people to request and have up to 20 weeks off per year. Or I don't know how often you get to do it. I didn't look at all the little details, but you can get 20 weeks off a year for a myriad of reasons. Just basically any reason you come up with, a personal emergency, a religious reason, any reason you have at all, you get 20 weeks of paid time off if you work in one of these daycare centers in one of these medical fields. That's what Tim Walz was doing to fight this fraud. Is that going to help, you think? Jesus Christ.
Do you take responsibility for failing to stop this fraud in your state?
Well, certainly I take responsibility for putting people in jail. Governors don't get to just talk theoretically. We have to solve problems. And I will note, it's not just Somalis. Minnesota is a generous state. Minnesota is a prosperous state, a well-run state. We're AAA bond rated, but that attracts criminals. Those people are going to jail. We're doing everything we can.
So Tim Walz isn't going to apologize. He isn't going to make a logical defense about anything that he's done or hasn't done, or even to defend the Somalis, other than to call you a white supremacist and a racist for looking into it and bringing it up. Ilhan Omar is not going to apologize. She's going to say, you should have looked into us. Why did you let all this stuff happen, when she introduces the bill to make you not be able to look into them. Then on top of that, a Democrat in Washington is in the middle of trying to secretly, sneakily pass a bill through with very little talk in the public about it, to block the public from receiving the information from these daycare centers because they know we're doing vigilante journalism against them to look into the fraud. So these companies and these daycares that take public money and take taxpayer money from the public, because they can't operate like a legitimate business in capitalism because they don't have real customers, they don't really have a business plan. It's just, let's just build a facility that can theoretically serve 99 children every day for 12 hours a day, and let's just build the government for that and not worry about actually creating a nice daycare or a good daycare to have customers come and pay a bill and pay to have daycare because this daycare is so awesome. No, it's a bullshit. They'll build a child prison and then bill the government for it. Then they remove the oversight. Tim Walz tells you how great of a state Minnesota's run so well. They're AAA bond rated. Though you know what the fuck that means, right? You know that means they're great. Then you see how they run the place. They block the oversight. Then they take the public funds, but they don't want to share their public information with it. Only a private business that takes no public funding has the right to block all of their data and block all their information from the public. But the Democrats will pass a bill that will block you from looking into this fraud yourself. So they won't look into it. They won't fix it. They'll actually create laws to make it easier to commit the fraud. Then they'll block you from looking into it as a regular person, and only they can look into it, but you know they're not going to. Are you mad yet? Because if you aren't mad yet, on top of that, they will then execute the propagandists in the media, CNN, all the mainstream media outlets, to attack the vigilante journalists like Nick Shirley that is using a FOIA request to get the public records from the places because they're receiving public funds. But they want to block all that, stop all that, attack Nick Shirley and say, it's actually not the fraud that's bad, it's that you're looking into the fraud. Who's looking into the fraud and what's his background? These people are disgusting. They really are. It is a full court press against us. The propaganda is so strong. They are assaulting our senses and they are assaulting our senses and insulting our intelligence at every turn. I'll talk just like them. Let me make this very clear. Tim Walz didn't become the candidate for vice president with Kamala Harris because he's a great public speaker or he's a strong leader or for anything because you've never heard of Tim Walz before Kamala picked him. It's because he is tied to this RICO mob level fraud. And the Democrats love money. They love their slush funds. They need them filled to the absolute top. They need their coffers filled at all times. And this is another way for them to skim off the top, take the taxpayer money, and do whatever they want, regardless on who votes for them, because they'll just buy votes anyway. Tim Walz didn't become the vice president candidate despite the fraud. He became the VP candidate because of the fraud. You know, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This shit's happening in Ohio. It's happening in Washington State. It's happening in D.C. It's happening everywhere, guys. It's happening all over the country. It's just not Somalians doing it. Other immigrant groups do it. Americans do it. Scumbags do it. Scammers do it. There's a lot of people doing this shit, dude. And we're not just talking about, oh, let's just change your address so we get extra food stamps and pretend my boyfriend doesn't live here. This is like full-blown shell corporation, RICO level organization. This is mob level organized crime. That's what this is. And make no mistake, Tim Walz did not elevate to the vice presidency. Kamala Harris didn't happen to have $2 billion to spend after campaigning for just 3 months because they're just really good guys. It's because they're sick and infested with money. They have so much money, it's pouring out of their ears. They have no idea what to do with it because they've been hitting the infinite money glitch for so long they don't know what to do. They just spend the shit on nothing and get no results and wonder, what we should do? Let's throw more money at it, like the homeless problem in California. I'm ranting and raving. I'll see you guys on the next one. Anything that I use, links will be down in the description. Check it out, press buttons, do whatever. I'll see you guys soon. This is probably a part 1. This is probably a volume 1 because this shit's crazy. All right, man. I'll see you guys soon.
Yeah,